an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you today, and really keen to ask you a few questions about the intersection of working with patients and being a leader in the pharmaceutical industry. The first thing I want to ask you is about kind of innovation. It's obviously fundamentally important to our industry. And I want to ask you what you think the biggest barrier is to working with innovation, and in particular, working with patients in order to innovate better.
I think innovation is a really broad topic in itself, but fundamentally, I'm not sure there are specific barriers as much as what we really are talking about when we're working with patients is connecting at a personal level and connecting to purpose. So with that in mind, innovation often comes at us in the form of technology or digital or other methodologies. We have to be able to listen and learn and hear from patients and then apply technological innovation as best in different circumstances. So one of the barriers is really thinking about how do we do both simultaneously to better serve patients.
I want to ask you also about leadership. You are a leader internally, and you're a leader probably in society. I would really like to know a bit about how you would describe your leadership style and how that helps drive the change that you want to drive.
So I think a lot about leadership because I really do believe different phenotypes of people make different leadership styles work and effective. And for my work, obviously being an empathetic leader is really important. And that might not be the same leadership capability that's needed for other leaders in other parts of organizations. But I really do believe what I bring to the table as a leader internally is empathetic leadership, but also a very strong part of my style is to connect and share stories. And that happens internally and externally. But why does that matter? It demonstrates that empathy can actually be turned into strategy and help identify and really explore and explain business goals in a different way that resonate with everybody.
Well, I love the term empathy, and I think for me, that's very much a part of my leadership style as well. And empathy helps us get to the real core of the problems that are important to solve. So, thinking about what you're saying, Wendy, is, part of being a leader is really prioritizing, what problems are we solving and why is that important? And in order to understand why they're important, we have to have empathy, especially in working with patients, right? What is that patient experience? What are the problems that we're solving? What are the jobs that they need help with? And so empathy and problem solving go hand in hand. And I think as leaders, especially in this area, in digital health, it's getting to the nugget of why does this matter to patients? Why does this matter to doctors? And how can we make it better? And sometimes that involves technology, but sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes it's people and processes and policy. So that's being brave, I think, as an empathetic leader and really focusing in on the problems that are important to solve.
And Lynda, sometimes I have experienced, or maybe it's my own interpretation, that when you lead with empathy, there's an automatic dismissal of, can you also lead with clear vision, clear strategy, clear business-minded impact? And I actually do believe the two go really hand in hand. And if you're leading from an empathetic place and that's your orientation, it's actually enabling, in my experience, more transparent, timely communication and being able to really think about decisions that we're making and the broad enterprise impact in a different way.
That's so true, right? Empathy is a superpower, and it, to your point, it doesn't mean that we're not looking at some of the other business drivers and metrics, but that superpower of bringing the understanding and context to the situation helps our team and helps that end product or solution that we're working on for sure.
Mm. So, Lynda, you brought up the topic of technology, and of course, it's hard to live without the words technology, AI, in every sentence almost that we speak these days. And I was just wondering, when it comes to technology, in particular, the amount of data that we have at our disposal and these new tools that we also have. What's your perspective on how we might be able to further our goals with technology, Wendy? What's your perspective on achieving this change with these tools? Is it something that you embrace?
I completely embrace this and admittedly have a lot to learn. And the way I've gone about understanding what is the potential big societal impact of artificial intelligence type approaches, technology within the work I do, I've really simplified it in my own head that what we're really talking about is ways to use machines or computers or data to inform broad scale decision making. And if we marry that with deeply understanding patient insights and verbatims as another input of data, I think we get to a place where we can really see what's going to help most people and still leave room to understand what do we need to do differently for certain situations or certain conditions or certain geographies. So taking a big, broad approach fueled by data and being able to analyze big sets of data and then personalizing it.
Lynda.
I agree. I think it goes back to, what are those problems that we're trying to solve? And I think sometimes we think of technology as agnostic, right? As somehow not human. And yet we humans have created technology. And so being aware of the way that we design technical solutions, the biases that we might bring to them, how to be inclusive and diverse in those solutions, I think is really very key especially in the discussion of AI.
Some of the areas I'm most excited about, I work in a lot of neurodegenerative conditions where people either don't ever gain or lose the ability to speak clearly and communicate their needs. And I think this is an area where AI is going to just level that challenge for people and really, if we have the right systems, enable those who have lost their voice or never had it to be able to communicate. And that's a fundamental human need, regardless of what else is going on with your healthcare or your disease or what you're dealing with. The ability to communicate and have people know what you're experiencing and what's most important and what you need to feel better is so just fundamental to being human.
One of the things, of course, with everything we've been talking about is that sometimes we want to caution people about sharing. And obviously, we've talked about the net positives, but there could also be net negatives. Would you be comfortable today walking up to almost any patient you meet and say the positives are going to outweigh the negatives? Or do you think that there's some work that we have to do before we can be fully confident in that?
I think there's so much good work that's been done in privacy by design, which is really all about making sure in plain language that people are informed, that they understand how their data is going to be used, and that they're in control. And I think that term control is really important. It is your data. But what I've found in working with patients now over 12 years is most want to contribute. Most want to make the path ahead easier for someone else than it has been for them. And very generous in terms of thinking of their data and how that can contribute. But they want control over that data. And I think that's a fair request.
And I completely agree. And Paul, I like the way you asked the question. Would you be comfortable saying to someone today the positives outweigh the negatives? And I think the reality is we don't know. It's a vast new world and so much is changing so fast. And also everyone's using AI and data, which are big, bold words, as if they mean one thing. And they don't. And so my experience is the same as yours, Lynda. People literally proactively send me their entire health record because they need help and they understand information is power. And with that information, maybe we can help them. So a big part of the burden of making this all make sense to the patient community, but also be the right thing to do, is we have to be very clear on the front end of what we're asking for, why we need it, how it will be used, and then where are the appropriate places to do this, even in an identified manner. We focused a lot on privacy, which is critically important. But is that actually addressing and answering the concerns that are to come? And I'm not sure. I'm not an expert, but it makes sense to me that the big piece of this is going to be the transparent communication at the beginning of where, when, why, and how data will be used. And then where we really have power is if everybody contributes to these data sets, the wonder of what we can do as we analyze across big sets of data faster is massive. And that doesn't jeopardize anybody's privacy, in the big picture.
I'd like you to let me know whether there's one thing that pharma or your company did in 2024 that you think we should be proud of, and maybe also one thing that we might have got wrong in 2024.
I'll jump in. I'm super energized and super proud of work that we're doing, specifically focused on ensuring everyone across our organization is listening to and learning from the people we serve, which are patients and caregivers. So in order to do that and make it real, organizationally, we've built frameworks that bring everyone to the table in an agile, innovative way of modeling organizational practice. And we bring these voices in, and it's in very big sessions or it's one-on-ones. But we've taken what we call patient verbatims and moved them into the world of data, which is what the organization speaks. We are a drug development research-driven company, and data is what moves the needle. And we're looking at patient verbatims very much as one of those key linchpins of data, similar to all the other bits that we get. I believe we are at the nexus of dramatic change from a patient engagement and patient centricity perspective. We are at a place where the role of people in this space of being heard and being able to really very proactively say what they need and what's important has just been validated in ways we haven't seen before. But that comes with a big responsibility to not just take what they can give, but return.
Wendy, if you could change one regulation, wave your magic wand, or change one rule overnight that we must comply with in our industry, what do you think it would be?
I feel really passionately about the concept of how regulators are preventing pharmaceutical companies from meaningfully engaging with patients. And I don't know that I would stand here today and say it's always a specific regulation or is it interpretation. But in a world where it's not us versus them, it's us with them, those conversations should be able to happen with no gray area.
What's the most exciting trend that you are seeing in pharma today?
For me, in the work I do, the most exciting trend is meaningful patient and caregiver engagement. And that comes internally and externally. It's really seeing other people across the organization embrace this work as being truly not just important because it connects people to our purpose, but part of the business decision framework and how we think about what we need to do with all the right inputs in mind. So I really do believe we're at the nexus of great change, and this is happening.
Wendy, is there anything that you think pharma should stop doing?
That's a really hard question for me to answer. Failing at clinical research. And I say that not even meaning to be glib, but what are we doing that we're doing the same way we've been doing for however many decades? Because most clinical drug development trials don't work. So how do we blow that up and think about having patients literally at the table, caregivers at the table, and redesigning? And then the other piece of this is I just think we need all voices at the same table. Regulators, payers, physicians, patients and caregivers, pharma. We're doing amazing work. Let's do it together.
Strengthening that relationship between patient and pharma is a key role that we see, sort of being in the background and the engine behind that. And when you think about it, when we go back to that notion of empathy and what a patient journey is, and what a doctor journey is in supporting their patient, it's a difficult and long one. And these are life-saving therapies. So that relationship between a patient and pharma is absolutely critical. And the ways that we can further support that, looking at policy that prevents that from happening, I think is really a missing piece of what we call patient centricity, because it's hard to have the patient in the center if you're not allowed to connect with them. And so I'd love to see that change, and I'd love to see pharma be able to have a relationship with a patient, not just when they're on therapy, but when they're off and prolonged as well, and really moving from that, illness to wellness type of mentality.
Lynda, I asked a patient once a very long time ago, what do you need from us? And he said, it's not what I need from you. You are my hope. And I just think that's so powerful if we really come from that orientation of that informs how we do what we do. That's a big responsibility to be someone's hope. So what does that put on us to communicate transparently, work ethically and compliantly, all of those pieces, because we carry someone's hope in our hands.
What would you say is the most overrated buzzword that we hear all the time in our industry?
I think if you were to ask me what is the most overrated buzzword, you might expect me to say patient centricity. And I don't think it is. I think we have to carry that beacon of light and hope and call it what it is. So I don't think patient centricity is the most overused buzzword. I think we have so many buzzwords, and really how we talk about what patient centricity is. If we're not making it real, if it's just words on a wall, then it's overused. But in the world of the future, where we really are taking those words and doing with them what we should, then it's not overused.
Anything, Lynda?
I love that. Love that. Yeah.
Marvelous. Okay. And Wendy, one final one in this round. If you had to pick another industry that you think that we in pharma should be inspired by, should learn from, what would you choose?
I think it's less a specific industry and more who's doing customer service right, because they have the same business operating model framework, same responsibility to communicate with investors. All of those pieces exist in other industries. So who's getting customer service right? Who's really working from a customer-centered perspective? And it might be a hotel chain or it might be a restaurant, but wherever those models exist, I think we can learn a lot from them, and we can also learn from the ones who maybe aren't working that way. And back to the digital conversation or the AI conversation, if you're working with a company and the only way you can get through a phone tree is to work with a chatbot, that's not very comforting. It's not, you hear people yelling on the phone. That's not what we want to emulate when we're talking about somebody with a healthcare diagnosis, so we can learn from that too.
Yeah, I so agree with that, Wendy. When we often hear from patients that they, when they get the diagnosis and they're sort of joining a club they never wanted to be a part of. But when we think about those other major life moments, those other major milestones in our lives, we have an onboarding, right? We have a support. If you're having a baby or you're getting married or you're retiring, there are certain rituals and traditions, and you talk to other people and you're supported along the way. And there's books that you can read and groups that you can join. And that's often not the case for patients. We don't onboard them into their condition in a way that takes the very best from that customer service practice.
Lynda, the other way I describe it is patients are the only volunteers in this ecosystem. They didn't go to school to be here. They didn't ask for this. They didn't sign up. They didn't take a job to do this. And yet everyone else we engage in the ecosystem, it's the opposite. They have degrees and training. And so we have to really, as important as these voices are, I love the concept of onboarding.
Wendy, we're out of time, but you have been marvelous. I am so pleased that we managed to capture you for a few minutes today.